This is the season, the 9 days, Tisha B'Av coming Saturday night, Sunday, and it's very painful, but it's healthy to be reminded what was. And from what was, it allows us also to appreciate all the brachas that we have, even at times that are tough. Even when the world is, let's say, against Israel, the most powerful country on earth today is in favor of Israel. And even though there are a lot of people, maybe a third of the country, America, who are against Israel, those in power are for Israel. And what matters is those in power. Excuse me. Now, we see it in a number of the other countries too. It's as simple as the results of an election in the Western democracies. Had United Kingdom elected Kemi Badenoch, the head of the Conservative Party, she's more pro-Israel than Netanyahu. She's amazing. You may remember the black lady who is the head of the Conservative Party in England. Amazing. The best they've ever had. But unfortunately, they're not the majority now. So we have Keir Starmer and that horrible David Lammy, who's just a curse, his foreign secretary. In France, the majority power is Emmanuel Macron, the left-wing government. And I heard about a month ago an interview on Israel News with Marie Le Pen, however she pronounced, and she has become incredibly pro-Israel. And so even in these countries that are anti-Israel, taking the charge and the lead, the opposition parties are pro-Israel in most cases. In some cases, the opposition's eventually won. In Belgium, they recently elected a conservative prime minister. He's pro-Israel. And Belgium has been one of the most anti-Semitic countries in Europe. But now they have a guy who's pro-Israel. Argentina, we've been through this a million times. That was the refuge for Nazi war criminals, the real ones, Hitler's guys. And now it's Javier Milei. Brazil, under the previous guy, very pro-Israel. Bolsonaro. Under the new guy, Lula, very, very anti-Israel. So often, just comes down to who wins the election. And the people that are voting are not even voting based on Israel. They're voting that they want right-wing politics or right-wing economics or left-wing politics, left-wing economics. They're not even voting based on Israel. In Canada, they were concerned that Trump is going to try to turn Canada into a 51st state. So Pierre Poilievre, the head of the Conservative Party, did not project as strong an image in terms of fighting Trump as Mark Carney, the head of the left-wing party. So they elected Mark Carney and the left-wing party, not because of Israel, but because they felt he'll do a better job standing up to Trump with this business of a 51st state. You may remember from Sunday classes half a year ago, Poilievre was leading by 23 points in the polls. Didn't matter how off the polls were. Poilievre was going to win. And he's, again, more pro-Israel than Netanyahu. And then Trump got involved with the 51st state business. Next thing you know, they elect Carney. And on the side, he's anti-Israel. So that's today. There are people that are pro, people that are anti. But as we get into the text now, we take a look back on what once was and could be. And it went far beyond whether you're for Israel, but what happened to Jews around the world in countries that today are considered civilized Western countries. Again, thank you for being here. Thank you for putting up with my cough. My lung is under study, and they think they'll need another month or two to find out which way it's going. But it shows up like in a cough, but everything else is okay. Baruch Hashem. So here we go. Thanks for being here. I'll be doing readings. I invite you to just look along in the text. I'll try not to just boringly read, but I've put this material together, and we're going to cover the following. We're going to have excerpts from every century. Crusades in Germany and France. The England expulsion in 1290. If you think Keir Starmer and David Lammy are trouble. The Jewish badge of shame. Remember Hitler and the Yellow Star? He was not the first. It stems from 14th century, that's the 1300s in Europe. We've been wearing badges of shame for 800 years. Black Death. That was the bubonic plague that hit Europe for 3 years, wiped out 1/3 of the population of Europe, and they wiped out 1/3 of the population of the Jews. Jews were not dying during the Black Death in the same numbers. They were. A lot of Jews were dying in the Black Death, but not the same numbers. The main theory is that Jews have a religious, theological obligation to wash our hands when we come out of the bathroom, and then we recite a bracha. Asher yitzarta Adam u'vorvo nekavim nekavim chalolim chalolim galiv yodu lifnei chisei kavodecha she'im yipatech chad mehem or yisatem echad mehem yefshar latgayim v'lamod lefnecha baruch Hashem rofecho basam afli lasot. I make the point that it's a bracha we have to know by heart. I'm not showing off that, wow, the rabbi knows that long bracha. Every Jew learns that bracha during the conversion process. They want to know that when you walk out of a bathroom, you're not going to start looking for a sitter to say the bracha. So you have to wash your hands and say the bracha. Same thing before you eat bread on the Tilat Yadayim. So what happened is Jews washed their hands, and therefore they carried fewer germs, too many germs, but nothing like the non-Jews. And fewer Jews died of the Black Death. And therefore, amid the plague, the anti-Semites, namely the non-Jews, started to wonder, why are the Jews not dying in the same numbers? They must be behind it, so they kill us. And we live that to this day on the woke, the right woke. We know about the left woke. We know about the left woke. And we know about the left woke. But there's a right woke. And you could be conservative and still have to admit and recognize there's a lot of danger on the right. Tucker Carlson, Candace Owens, it's moving over to Joe Rogan. And the things that come out of their mouths, things like Tucker Carlson, his latest conspiracy theory is that Jeffrey Epstein was working for the Mossad. Candace Owens, her latest conspiracy theory is that the Mossad assassinated John F. Kennedy. And the thing is, it's easy to say, well, they're a bunch of idiots. But that's how they get 1 million+ followers. That means they've got 1 million+ idiots who follow them. And instead of attending a good Gemara shir or good Torah shir or just watching a good TV show, they spend an hour at night listening to Candace Owens or Tucker Carlson or the guests that Joe Rogan has. And they listen to these conspiracies. You even get someone like Marjorie Taylor Greene, who, again, I don't go shooting after Republicans and conservatives. And I initially tried to find some defensive things to say for her. But I'm now persuaded beyond any doubt she's as bad as Ilhan Omar, a real bad anti-Semite. So they're out there, and they believe in conspiracies. You remember the Rothschild lasers. And these people are in positions of authority, or even if they're not, they have 1 million followers. When you have 1 million followers, that makes you dangerous. But you don't know who these people are, and you don't know what each of these crazy people is capable of doing. And so, but you look back in the past, let's look back in the past. Compare Candace Owens and Tucker Carlson to what we're going to see here. But in the Black Death, just as there were those who suggest that Jews were behind 9/11, even though it was obviously Saudi Arabians, 15 of the 19 were Saudi Arabians, and there are those that want to blame Jews for COVID. The Inquisition, that's the 14. So you got the 1000s, 1100s, 1200s, 1300s, 1300s, 1400s, Martin Luther and Protestantism, 1500s. The Jewish oath, More Judaico, 1600s. Jews under Islam in the Middle Ages. Even General Ulysses S. Grant during Civil War, 1800s. Lynching of Leo Frank in Marietta, Georgia, 1900s. Let's go forward. Let's see what we're talking about. Okay. So let's see, this will be counterclockwise. Okay. Then it's just gonna have to process it. Okay. This is from a book called Jew and the Cross. This is during the period of the Crusades. Even the great codifiers of the Byzantine Empire, Theodosius and Justinian, although subject to the typical Christian Jew hatred, were far less vindictive in their planning and actions than the ever irate dominant clergy. It was at the time of the coronation of Richard the Lionhearted, 1189, when open wrath against the Jews broke out in England. Remember, when you look at the British now, and they talk very eloquently and tight-lipped, stiff lower lip, and very elegant and proper. These people have a history that they were wild mongrels, the British. And during the time of like Richard the Lionhearted, he did not want the Jews hurt. Richard the Lionhearted liked having Jews around because they could be persecuted to his advantage, sort of like the way the Russian Tsars would take advantage of Jews, force us to do things for the government and take our money, and often they protected us. And then when they got in real trouble politically with the masses, then they would set off pogroms. That word did not exist in the 1100s. They started off different kind of riots for the purpose of getting the people's focus away from how the government is messing up, and people could blame the Jews. So those kings like to keep Jews around. One must bear in mind that throughout the centuries of the medieval era, the Jews were not admitted into any craftsman guild. You couldn't make a living in most fields, nor were they permitted to acquire farmlands. We've talked just recently about how Jews could not get farms. One of the reasons we did not even want farmlands, because we would be expelled from countries and would not be able to take that with us. At least we could bring knowledge with us. So we would get educated in professions and skills if we could. And so no point in owning farms if we can't take them. But also they did not allow us to buy land in their countries, even though we were born in their countries. So all the Jews could do was hire themselves out as middlemen to non-Jews. Whatever you do, or your spouse does, or your children or parents do, think of the world that we live in today and the options we have. Jews did not have options. Again and again, ecclesiastical curbs were imposed on Jews, such as isolation in crowded ghettos, and the wearing of degrading barb like a Jewish star, prohibition of Christians to trade or fraternize with them. So now we're going to talk about the Blood Libels. In 1262 in London, 1,500 Jews were murdered by enraged masses. That's now England says, if you don't end the war with Hamas the way we want, we're going to recognize an Arab country in part of Israel. That's nothing. They were killing 1,500. That's like October 7th, led by cross-bearing clergy. In 1279, all the Jews of London were arrested. They just arrested every Jew in the city. You think Ma'am Danny is bad? Every Jew in London was arrested with the understanding that they're going to be expelled. 280 were executed. And in the year 1290, that's only 11 years later, the Jews were expelled. Under the pressure of the Archbishop of Canterbury, King Edward I expelled all the Jews from England. But we were forced, by the way, to leave all our property behind. They stole Jewish property. And so 17,000, the last Jews of England, left for France and Belgium. And many of them never even made it because They died. They were on boats and ships going across the bodies of water. England is like an island. And to get to France and Belgium, they have to go by boat, by ship. And many captains took their money for passage and then threw them overboard and killed them. And so it went. We'll continue. No Jew is permitted back until 1648. Some say 1648 under Oliver Cromwell. Some say 1659. There was a rabbi, Menashe ben Yisrael. Menashe ben Yisrael met with Oliver Cromwell. And, in the Middle Ages in Europe, there were real Christians. They believed in the Bible. Some Protestant, some Catholic, and they killed each other all the time when they weren't focused on Jews. Over Bible, over religious issues. Thousands upon thousands, tens of thousands were murdered in the Middle Ages in countries like England and France over religious disagreements, Protestants and Catholics. We still see it in some places. In the modern era, many of us grew up, it was still going on in Ireland. Presently, it's not. The day will come that it does again. When they're not picking on Jews, the Irish Catholics, they go after the Protestants. So Menashe ben Yisrael met with Oliver Cromwell, and he made a biblical argument. He said, Jesus, whom you are waiting for, if you look at the Bible part that you call the Old Testament, it says that the Messiah will not come except when the Jews are spread on the four corners of the earth. That God is going to punish the Jews for having turned away from God and the Torah, and we will be dispersed throughout the world. And when we are completely dispersed throughout the world, we will turn back to God. We will circumcise our hearts. We will become good Torah observant Jews again, and he will bring us back from the four corners of the earth with the Messiah. So Rabbi Menashe ben Yisrael convinced Oliver Cromwell that he personally is holding up the return of Jesus, the second coming, because although he's not the one who expelled the Jews in 1290, now it's the mid-1600s, and he has the power to bring the Jews back to England. And until the Jews come back to England, Jesus cannot come because we're not spread throughout all the four corners of the earth. There's a section of the earth that's closed. And based on that, Cromwell said Jews can come back in order so that Jesus could come. That's how we got back into England. So Cromwell allowed it, but until then, we were expelled. Let's continue. Crusades, again, Middle Ages. As for the Jews of Jerusalem, when they took refuge in their chief synagogue during the Crusades, and the building was set on fire, and they were all burnt alive. Weeping with joy and singing songs of praise, the Crusaders marched in procession to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, where they praised Jesus that they were able to take part in burning the chief synagogue in Jerusalem and burning all the Jews in the synagogue. So that's what's going on during the First Crusade. If one bears these happenings in mind, seems natural enough that the first great massacre of European Jews would have occurred during the First Crusade. The official crusading army, consisting of barons and their associates, had no part in the massacre, which was carried out entirely by the hordes who formed in the wake of the crusade. That's what I was saying about the likes of Candace Owens and Tucker Carlson. It's the millions who follow these people. When you see they have 1 million followers, subscribers, views, those are the people that are capable of incredibly crazy things, like the guy that just shot up a whole bunch of people in New York the other day. And then you hear, well, he had mental illness. There's a lot of people out there with mental illness. In Mainz, Germany, and Worms, these are cities in Germany that were particularly hit hard during the Crusades. And Germany and France, once the Jews had been expelled from England, the worst remaining Crusades were Germany and France. At Mainz, where there lived the largest Jewish community in Germany, events took the same place as 800 Jews perished in Worms. The chief lay lord and the rich burghers, they were the ones who protected the Jews. They wanted civil stability. They counted on Jews to trade, to provide financing for international trade. And sort of like Shylock and the Merchant of Venice, they hated and despised Jews, but they turned to Jews for financing. And Jews were in a position to do financing. We've learned this in the past because the Torah does not allow Jews to lend money on interest or to borrow money on interest from other Jews. And Christians in the Middle Ages took the Torah that seriously, what they call the Old Testament, and they understood that when it says, you shall not lend on interest to your brother, shall not borrow an interest from your brother, they just had a different brother. To them, their fellow Christian was a brother. So among the Christendom of Middle Ages Europe, they would not borrow an interest or lend on interest to Christians. And nobody wants to go around lending large amounts of money if they're not going to be protected by interest. So there was no commerce. It couldn't explode and expand because they couldn't move money around. Meanwhile, Jews, by the Torah, were not allowed to lend on interest or borrow an interest from fellow Jews, but are allowed to do it with non-Jews. Thus, Christians were allowed to borrow from Jews and pay interest, and Jews were allowed to lend to Christians on interest. And that's how the Middle Ages commerce moved. And that's why kings who hated Jews protected Jews, because they needed Jews to promote commerce. Jews also were valuable in commerce because when there were legal disputes, they needed the Jews to resolve legal disputes in international trade. If you had a legal dispute between a Brit and a Frenchman over a contract, the French court would hold for the Frenchman, the British court would hold for the Brit. They all knew they would not get pure justice in courts. But if they traded through Jews, borrowing and lending through Jews, the Jews had their own international courts of law called Bet Din, Bet Din. And Christians accepted religious rabbinical courts of law as the closest they could get to impartial arbitrators. So they were willing to bring their cases. They actually were willing to bring their cases to Batei Din, to Jewish courts of law. So they protected Jews. But at the same time, the masses during the Middle Ages killed Jews. So you have the cardinals and the bishops and the burghers, that is the wealthy, protecting Jews, but they were fewer in number than the hordes and masses of mongrels among the Germans, the French, the Brits, who could not really be controlled, nor could their local parish priests be controlled. So whereas a bishop or a cardinal would protect Jews, the local priest would rile the people up and incite them. We continue. So that's the Crusades. And he mentioned Trier, from the Rhine cities, a band of crusaders moved to Trier, that's in France, I believe. Archbishop delivered a sermon demanding the Jews be spared, but as a result, he himself had to flee. Here too, although some Jews accepted baptism, the great majority perished. The Crusaders moved to Metz, Germany, then to Cologne, Regensburg, and Prague. Then came the Second Crusade, and so on and so forth. Next, the Jewish badge. In Germany in the 14th and 15th centuries, 1300s, 1400s, Jews were compelled to use a special hat known as the Judenhut. It was pointed at the top like a dunce cap, and the brim was often twisted in the shape of a pair of horns to reinforce the imagery of the Jew as the devil, the Satan with horns. Red was the favorite color, just as Satan. And these Jews were forced to wear it in parts of Germany, but most famous was France. France may claim the honor of inventing the circular badge. It was this that Hitler followed and imitated. It was already known in Paris in 1208. So these people, when someone like Macron comes out and attacks Israel, and he's going to go and he's going to recognize, understand it's in the blood of the French. This has been going on with the French for 1,000 years and more. In Marseille, Jews were permitted an alternative. They might wear either a yellow calep or headdress, or if they prefer, they could adopt a wheel that is a circular kind of patch that they had to wear on their garments. And it had to be started at age 7. Jewish children from age 7, you've seen children with the yellow badges during Holocaust? In France, 1200s, 7-year-old Jewish children already had to wear those. And variations in different places. Marseille, the age was 7. In Arles, 13. Avignon, for boys to 14, and so on and so forth. The wheel was mostly on the chest or above the waist. Sometimes a second circle on the back, so you could tell from both sides that you're standing behind the Jew. Sometimes on the hat, sometimes on the left shoulder. Gregory IX represents the usual. And so it goes, and so on and so forth. The Jewish badge. Next. What ended up happening next is the book burnings. Now, the book burnings, we need to take a moment and just explain. If you look at a map, I look at the map of Europe until I started teaching Torah classes, I didn't really, and in Israel, I didn't really have a good picture of Europe. As a New Yorker, I didn't even have a good picture of America. I knew that Nebraska was somewhere between New York and China. If you're a New Yorker, you don't know where anything is. Then you live in California 30 years, you start to pick up on things. San Francisco is up and San Diego is down. Okay, you pick up things. So when you look at a map of Europe, you've got England, and that's like an island. And then you go to the east, to the continent of Europe, which they share with French across the English Channel. And that's France. Right underneath France, south of France, is Spain. And then Spain is like a peninsula called the Iberian Peninsula. And on the edge of that peninsula is Portugal. And for our purpose, and then after France is Germany. England, the Channel, France, Germany, Poland. France, Spain, Portugal. Now here's what was going on. And it's not a very proud moment in Jewish history, just as a lot of stuff going on with American Jews will not be looked upon in the future as proud moments in Jewish history. And in the same way, often our non-proud moments, we bring it on ourselves. And that's why so many of us aggravate. because we watch Jews bring it upon us. That Ben and Jerry and George Soros and Bernie Sanders, they're not just bringing it on themselves, they bring it on us. When you get Bernie Sanders and George Soros, that leads to Tucker Carlson's and the Marjorie Taylor Greens as they're growing up and evolving their own worldview to start noticing there are Jews on the left, like Bernie Sanders, Ben and Jerry. I could start naming them. Where do you stop? Jews with the Democrats. And that starts among the crazies on the right, the conspiracy theorists. They start building how there's a Jew here and a Jew there, and suddenly a Jeffrey Epstein, they can't just look at it as a pervert who life caught up with him and either he got killed in prison, which he deserved, or he hanged himself in prison, which he deserved. No, to have to add a little Jewish tweak to it, maybe he's in the Mossad. And that's where that comes from. We bring it very often on ourselves. You get him, Trotsky. There are Jews who died in Ukraine. Excuse me. There are Jews who died in Ukraine during the 1940s at the hands of the Einsatzgruppen. Germany had portable death camps, portable death machines, not only the famous concentration camps of Dachau and Auschwitz, Buchenwald, Treblinka, Bergen-Belsen. I can go on and on too much. But they had portable death camps, the Einsatzgruppen, where they sent people. They sent people with rifles and shovels to dig mass graves and other equipment to kill massive numbers of Jews in Ukraine. And they picked up, they were Germans, and they gathered local Ukrainians who willingly and happily joined the Nazis in the mass murder of Jews in the Ukraine in the 1940s. And why were they so anti-Semitic? What was up their crotch? It all began with Trotsky. They hated Jews anyway, don't get me wrong. The Ukrainians, like everybody else, especially the less educated they are, the more susceptible they are to conspiracy theories and to nightmare stories, boogie stories, and the Jews. So you already have that. But what really made them special is they blamed Trotsky for starving them. They really suffered. The Ukrainians really suffered under Stalin. He mass starved them. You want to talk about famine and hunger? Gaza is nothing. By the way, Gaza is nothing. But Ukraine, mass starvation, deliberate national policy to starve millions to death. Look, we all know, we love Israel. We know there's no national policy to cause Arabs to starve. We know what's going on. We know that they're desperately trying to get Hamas out of Gaza. And they can't let Hamas keep taking all the food. And they've got to figure it out. And it's just a real mess. But we know that there's no Jew walking around saying, let's starve people. But as national policy, Stalin decided he wanted to mass starve the Ukrainians. And Trotsky oversaw that. Now, he was not much of a Jew, was he? Neither was Bernie Sanders, neither is, or Doug Emhoff, or any of these, Ben and Jerry, George Soros. But in the eyes of the haters, they attribute all of them, all of us to them. And that's what it was in the Middle Ages. Here is something that is so terrible, and it led to so much damage. as I said, France is just on top of Spain. The southern border of France is the northern border of Spain. Rambam lived in Spain, northern border. He was the greatest rabbi of his time, maybe of all time. In France, they were anti-Rambam. The Orthodox, first of all, everybody was Orthodox. There's no such thing as reform until Germany in the 1815 Hamburg Temple. Until 1815, there was no reform anywhere. And conservative Judaism is another 100 years later, mostly in America, a little bit in Leipzig in the 1900s. But everybody was Orthodox till then. In France, they did not trust Rambam. Rambam, why do I trust him? Why does everybody trust him? Why do rabbis trust? 700 years later, we trust him. He's got the certification of the passage of time. At that time, he was brand new. He was a new young guy, a new rabbi, who had deigned to publish a codification of Jewish law that was being promoted in Spain as the code of Jewish law, the Mishnah Torah of the Rambam, the Yad HaChazakah. It was being said that here was a genius rabbi who knew the entire Talmud and the entire Torah. So he knew the Mishnah, knew the Torah, knew the Talmud. He knew everything, every single page. And since the Talmud is structured a little bit freewheeling with segues all over, he codified it. He put everything in a topical order in the form of a law, of a legal code. Like California has vehicle code, health code. The federal government has the United States Code. Like I'll say, somebody is charged with violating United States Code section XYZ. It's a code. So you've learned a lot with me, Rambam, over the course of 2 years and more. We learned Mishnah Torah. So he presented it. He did not include footnotes, references. He simply gave you the code without footnotes. In France, the rabbinate of France said it is impossible that there could exist a human being who would know all of that stuff, who would know every single thing in Judaism. We don't believe it. We don't believe it. And if you'll come and say, well, look it up, see, he got it all right. The retort was, he didn't give us footnotes. He cites laws we don't remember seeing, because there are really esoteric laws. You have never learned the esoteric laws with me, because they're too esoteric. I know some, and I don't know some, because you can go a lifetime unless you really study Daf Yomi, every single Daf, and you never miss a day, and you manage to remember it. There are sections of the Talmud no one studies, except Daf Yomi. You see it once in 7 years, really quick. So the position in southern France, it was known as the Provence community, Provence, Provence, like spelled like Provence, but pronounced Provence. In the Provence Jewish community, they said, there's no way we don't know where some of this stuff comes from. He has no footnotes, and we think he made some stuff up. And if he even made up one law, the whole 14 volumes are invalid. If someone would make up one law in a code of Jewish law, then you can't rely on anything in that book, in that compendium. So what did they do? They burned his books. In southern France, they started gathering any manuscripts of the Rambam they could find, and they burned them, mass book burnings. And at that time, it was like Crusades times, the 1100s, and Christians were at war with Christians, burning each other's books. And keep in mind, it's less effective now to burn books for two reasons. Number one, it conveys images of the old book burnings of the Middle Ages. So that is not a way to persuade people and win people over. You never are going to win people by burning books nowadays. Secondly, you burn the books, so you buy another one on Amazon. What book are you going to burn that I can't order again on Amazon? Almost anything, if it's got any value, even $5, $3, get on Amazon. But in the Middle Ages, in the 1100s, before Gutenberg and the printing press, books were manuscripts. They were hand copied. That's what monks did, M-O-N-K. That's what monks did with their lives. You would join a monastery, and that's what you did for a living. You copied books. So there'd be another copy. Let's say St. Thomas Aquinas or whoever or whatever. So there's a volume. We need more copies. So the monk sits and copies the book. Then he copies the book again. And he's paid because they didn't have printers. And people hand copied books. Can you imagine book burnings when you're burning manuscripts and there's no printing presses? In many cases, you're destroying for all time the text that you're burning. There might have been something by Rashi. Rashi's the 1100s. There might have been something by Rashi. If it was burned, if there was a copy elsewhere, Baruch Hashem, we still have it. Or it could be lost. The Tosfot, I can go on and on. So they started burning Rambams, and they actually reached out to Crusade era Catholic monks to help them burn Rambams. So what happened? It's like you never went swimming. Someone takes you swimming, and turns out you like swimming. You never played baseball. Someone takes you to a baseball game. You like the game. You start going to the game more. They liked it, burning Jewish books. Priests, why are we burning Christian books? We can even burn Jewish books. And unlike Christians, Jews write books, a lot more books. So here's what happened in the Middle Ages. This is what we went through. How are we doing on time? Still doing time. So we're up to the book burnings. The writings of the famous philosopher and rationalist Moshe Maimonides, that's Rambam, aroused a heated controversy in Jewish circles early in the 13th century, that's the 1200s, which led to bitter recriminations between his followers and opponents. In 1232, the Orthodox Jews of Montpellier in France issued a ban on Rambam and then invited Dominican friars who, together with Franciscan friars, were prosecuting the Inquisition, that's the 1200s, not the Inquisition of Spain in the 1400s, to proceed against the Jewish heretics in the same fashion as against Christian dissenters. So the preaching orders acceded with eager enthusiasm. And after a search instituted at the command of the papal legate in Montpellier, all Rambam books. In December 1233, the first public burning of Hebrew books in history was celebrated. This event provided sufficient precedent for the Inquisition to repeat it elsewhere and to include all classes of Hebrew literature. A month or so after the Montpellier Auto de Fe, an estimated 12,000 volumes of Talmudic and other works were publicly destroyed at Paris. And thus, having extended the new domain, the Inquisition assumed the right to confiscate and burn Jewish writings as it saw fit. 1239, Pope Gregory IX, instigated by an apostate Jew, it's always a Bernie Sanders, it's always a George Soros. Nicholas Donin, now a Dominican friar, he left the Jewish people and became a Dominican monk, labeled the Talmud as outrageously anti-Christian, instructed kings and prelates of France, England, Castile, Aragon, Navarre, Leon, and Portugal and the heads of the two orders, namely the Franciscans and the Dominicans, to seize all Jewish books and deliver them to the friars for investigation. They can investigate them, they can't even read them. It's in Hebrew. Yeah, many of the early monks knew Hebrew, but they weren't in a position. The first public disputation and so on and so forth. And that began something else we'll skip because of time. So this is the first campaign in the violent war against the Talmud, which continued unabated into modern times, arousing an intense and uninformed hatred of the Talmud as a source of Jewish blindness and obstinacy, a book filled with, they would say, blasphemous attacks, and so on and so forth. And thus, it moved more and more towards the Inquisition. We move now to 1348 to 1351, the Black Death. The Black Death was a period that Europe, in 3 years, 1/3 of all Europe died. Later in time, it's been associated with the bubonic plague, an infection, a bacterium that rats carried. You know, there was not much hygiene in the Middle Ages, and rats got into the water supply. And they did poison the water supply, rats. But people didn't know about bacteria and about germs the same way. As I said, Jews were washing our hands before hamotzi and when coming out of a bathroom, but that was not common practice among the nations. And so they tried to figure out what causes this, and so they projected. How do you project? You think, what would I do? How can I explain it? Well, look what we have done to the Jews for the last 250 years, since 1100, 1096. From 1100 to 1350, for 250 years, how many millions of Jews have we killed? First Crusade, Second Crusade, Third Crusade, book burnings, badges of shame, all over Europe, England, France, Germany. What would we have done? These people would think. And they would project, if that's what they would have done, presumably that's what the Jews did. And a conspiracy theory broke out. Jews must have poisoned the waters of Europe. No one would have thought of ascribing it to rats. Ascribed it to Jews. And so Jews would be arrested and would be put on trial and would be required to confess. And you know how they get confessions, the way Stalin got confessions. So, 1348, there was a judicial inquiry which was made by order of the court of the illustrious Prince our Lord, Amadeus, Count of Savoy, and his subjects against the Jews of both sexes who were there imprisoned, each separately. This was done after public rumor had become current because of the poison put by them into the wells, springs, and other things which the Christians use. Hence, this their confession made in the presence of a great many trustworthy persons. Agamet, the Jew, lived at Geneva, was put to torture a little, then was released. After a long time, having been subjected again to torture a little, he confessed in the presence of a great many trustworthy persons. When this came to the notice of Rabbi Peretz, a Jew of Chambéry, who was a teacher of their law, he sent for this Agamet, whom he had searched. And when he had come before him, he said, "We have been informed that you're going to Venice to buy silk and other wares. Here, I'm giving you a little package of half a span in size, which contains some prepared poison and venom in a thin-soled leather bag, distributed among the wells cisterns and springs about Venice and the other places in which you go, in order to poison the people who use the water of the aforesaid wells that will have been poisoned by you, namely the wells in which the poison will have been placed. Right? So he's giving them a little packet of poison that's going to be enough to poison all the wells of Europe. All the wells of Venice is going to go to each well, each cistern, each spring, from Venice to other places. And this one little packet from this rabbi. So he took the packet. Obviously, this is your conspiracy theories. Thank God they didn't have social media then. It's bad enough without social media. All you would need is the Tucker Carlson, Candace Owens, Marjorie Taylor Greene, conspiracy theorists. Adjamet took this package full of poison, carried it with him to Venice, and he threw and scattered a portion of it in the well or cistern of fresh water, which was there near the German house, in order to poison the people who used the water of that cistern. And he says that's the only cistern of sweet water in the city. He also says that he mentioned the Rabbi Parrott promised to give him whatever he wanted for his troubles. Of his own accord, remember he had been tortured a little, Adjamet confessed further that after this had been done, he left at once in order that he should not be captured by the citizens or others, and that he went personally to Calabria and Apulia and threw the above-mentioned poison into many wells. That little package really lasted quite a bit, huh? And so we come to the next. So that was the poisoning of the wells. This is what Jews have been through. Jews have been through this centuries. This is from the Inquisition. I'm only going to read a little. It's too hard to read. So I'm just going to read a touch. From the Inquisition, a lady was accused of not eating pork. And that means she's a secret Jew. Because if she weren't Jewish, why would she not eat pork? And they had an inquisition to discover and expose ostensibly Catholic Spaniards who in fact were Jews. She was carried to the torture chamber and told to tell the truth. She was ordered to be stripped so as to allow free play for the torturing ropes. The tying of the arms was commenced. One cord applied to the arms, twisted, etc., and she was told to tell what she had done, for she was tortured because she had not done so. And another turn of the cord was ordered. I don't know what I've done. I did not eat pork, made me sick. So another turn of the cord. I don't know. What do you want me to tell you? I did not eat because I did not wish to eat the pork. Another turn. Oh, my arms, I won't go into. And my arms are breaking. Loosen me. I don't know what you want me to say. I'm willing to say it. What do you want me to confess? I don't know what I have to say. If I did, I would say it. Cords are tighter. Then the cords are tighter, skipped on that. She was told to say it, to tell it. So I do not know it. Oh, they're tearing me to pieces. Tied, etc., etc. I'm skipping a lot of it. But the basic point is, this is an account of a lady saying, I am totally ready now to confess anything you want. Just leave me alone and stop torturing me. And they're saying, no, you got to say it of your own accord. It can't be that you're saying it because we're telling you what to say. We want you to confess. I said, I did not want to eat it. I know only that I did not want to eat it. This she repeated many times. Court wanted to confess. She consciously practiced Judaism. She said, I did it. I don't know how I did it. I did it for what the witnesses say. Let me go. She said, I don't know how to say it. I have no memory. Lord, you witness that if I knew how to say anything, I would say it. I know nothing more to say than that I did it, and God knows it. So she's saying, I did it to observe the law, the Jewish law. So then she was asked, what law? Mosaic law. The law that the witnesses say I was. And she goes on and on. She was told to tell the truth or the etc. She'd be tortured more, and she's screaming more, etc. We'll go on from there. And after all of that, they finally got out of her a statement that she's Jewish and she didn't eat pork because she's Jewish. And that's how they torture Jews. Really, really, that's just one woman, one account. That's what the Inquisition was. The founder of Lutheranism, the Reverend Martin Luther, he wrote a pamphlet called Concerning the Jews and Their Laws. Martin Luther had begun as a great friend of the Jews. Martin Luther had believed initially, he said, the mistake that the Catholic Church is making is you torture the Jews and you threaten to kill them and you're making them into your enemies. Don't we want them to convert to Christianity? They are not converting. It's not working. The more we threaten to kill them, and even do, they don't convert. We should do it the other way. We should show them Christian love, Christian kindness, and they will see that Christianity is a better way to live, and they will come in their masses converting if we simply treat them the right way. So he was a very great friend of the Jews for a few years. And after a few years, he took note that no Jews were converting to Christianity, that all that love and kindness and charity, everybody was Jewish. Nobody wanted to convert. So he turned out into really, really bad. It's sort of, he went back to phase one. To the last part of what I wanted to share with you today. I think this last part, the More Judaico. Let me just make sure. More Judaico, skip that, so that we're on time for, okay. And I'm just going to share one other quick thing. Primarily the More Judaico, and then one last thing. Two last things. But the two last things, real quick. More Judaico, in the Middle Ages, as late as 1847, 150 years ago, 175 years ago, when a Jew was called to testify in court, they were not sworn in with the standard, do you solemnly swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth, so help you. Not that. There was a special oath over the centuries throughout all of Europe that was used when Jews testified in court, which is why Jews, when they had problems with other Jews, stuck with Bein, but sometimes if you were involved in a contract with non-Jews, even as a middleman, you ended up having to testify. The Jew shall stand on a sow skin, and the 5 books of Moses shall lie before him, and his right hand up to the wrist shall lie on the book. He can be sworn in on a chumash, and he shall repeat after him who administers the oath. Regarding such property of which the man accuses you, you know nothing of it, nor do you have it. You never had it in your possession. You do not have it in any of your chests. You have not buried it in the earth, nor locked it with locks. So help you God who created heaven and earth. All right, not so bad. Valley and hill, woods, trees, and grass. And so help you the law which God himself created and wrote with his own hand and gave Moses on Sinai's mount. And so help you the 5 books of Moses, that you may never more enjoy a bite without soiling yourself all over as did the king of Babylon. We've actually learned in our Navi class how Nebuchadnezzar reached a point in time when he became like an animal in the forest, and for 7 years soiled himself and was insane and was like an animal in the forest. So you see, the Christians in the Middle Ages, they knew their Bible. They knew their religion. But we're still on the oath. And may that sulfur and pitch flow down upon your neck that flowed over Sodom and Gomorrah, and the same pitch that flowed over Babylon flow over you, but 200 times more. And may the earth envelop and swallow you up, as it did Datan and Aviram. And may your dust never join other dust, and your earth never join other earth in the bosom of Master Abraham, if what you say is not true and right. And so help you, God, that you have sworn the truth. If not, may you become as leprous as Naaman and Gehazi. That's in the book of Kings, Malachim. And may the calamity strike you that the Israelite people escaped as they journeyed from Egypt's land. And may a bleeding and a flowing come forth from you and never cease, as your people wished upon themselves when they condemned God, Jesus Christ. He's quoting from their Bible, which alleges that Jews said that. It is true, so help you God, who appeared to Moses in a burning bush, which yet remained unconsumed. It is true by the oath that you have sworn, by the soul which you bring on the day of judgment before the court, before the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. It is true, so help you God, and the oath you have sworn. And that is the oath whenever a Jew was about to testify in court. Please place your hand on your Bible and repeat after me. And what I just read, the More Judaico, the Jewish oath. Just two quick looks, not going to spend time on it because I want to keep it within an hour or so, our usual time frame. But very briefly, two other moments in Jewish anti-Semitism history that we just must never forget. One is in the United States. In the United States, during the Civil War, a conspiracy theory broke out in the Midwest that Jews do not work the land. Jews are not farmers. Jews are only money makers, investors, nowadays Wall Street, investors, diamond merchants. And we've talked about that in our Thursday class several times. But when that conspiracy theory spread among the Union armies in the North during the Civil War, the allegation was the following: that Jews do not fight. Jews are not patriots. That Jews do not have loyalty to anyone but themselves and their money. And therefore, it was spread among the Union generals, officers in the Union armies, that Jews have been descending from all over, wherever they live in the North or the South. They descend upon battlefields. When they hear a battle is about to break out, erupt, they descend on that battlefield, Shiloh in Tennessee, or Bull Run in Virginia, you name it, Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. And they basically look to make money. They go to the soldiers and they offer to buy things from the soldiers or to sell things to the soldiers. And they're just there to make money. So this is what ends up starting. It started with 1862, and it reached the commander-in-chief of the Union armies, General Ulysses S. Grant, who later even would become president. It started with this guy, Major General Herbert, being written, refuse all permits to come south of Jackson, Mississippi, for the present. Grant was then perhaps in Vicksburg. He was doing a siege. He had laid siege to Vicksburg, which fell the 4th of July, 1863. So this is November 9, 1862, which is 9 months before Vicksburg surrendered. And he had a siege going for over a year. Refused all permits to come south of Jackson, Mississippi. The Israelites especially should be kept out. Keep the Jews away. Next, give orders to all the conductors on the road. No Jews are to be permitted to travel on the railroad south from any point. In other words, I'm fighting here in Mississippi. I don't want any Jews coming here. Keep them away from our battlefield. They're such an intolerable nuisance that the department must be purged of them. A couple of weeks later, a month later, December 8th. On account of the scarcity of provisions, all cotton speculators, Jews, and other vagrants having no honest means of support except trading upon the misery of the country, and in general, yada, 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 will leave in 24 hours. or will be put to duty in the entrenchments means they'll be put to hard labor. Now, December 17, continuing. Let's see. Mostly by Jews and other unprincipled traitors. So well satisfied have I been of this, that I instructed the commanding officer at Columbus, South Carolina, to refuse all permits to Jews to come south, and I frequently had them expelled. The Jews seem to be a privileged class that can travel anywhere. They will land at any woodyard on the river and make their way through the country. If not permitted to buy cotton themselves, they will act as agents for someone else who will buy it military. You see what's going on here? He's accusing Jews of going to the Southern armies, the Confederacy, and buying cotton. Remember, cotton was a Southern product. That's what the slaves were bringing. The slaves were picking cotton, right? So cotton was growing in Dixie in the South, and it was not available easily to people in the North. And Grant wants to starve out laying siege to the South. So he certainly doesn't want people going around enriching Southerners in Dixie by buying their cotton, and even worse, then going to Union soldiers and offering to sell them the cotton. So he wants the Jews kept away. And it's like the Jews to receive and pay for it in treasury notes, which the Jews will buy up at an agreed rate, paying gold. And finally, this was the all-time General Order number 11 of December 17, 1862. This is probably the lowest moment of anti-Semitism in American Jewish history, where the commander-in-chief of the Union armies, who eventually became president of the United States, issued this general order. The Jews as a class, violating every regulation of trade established by the Treasury Department and also department orders, are hereby expelled from the department within 24 hours from the receipt of this order. Post commanders will see that all of this class of people be furnished passes and required to leave, and anyone returning after such notification will be arrested and held in confinement until an opportunity occurs of sending them out, et cetera, et cetera. And so there was a delegation of Jews from the North who raced to Washington, D.C. to Abraham Lincoln with a copy of that. And they brought it to Lincoln's attention. And Lincoln, as commander-in-chief, overruled General Order number 11. And had he not been Lincoln, had we not had the right president at the right moment, he put an end to it. It's a very bad blemish on Grant's legacy, and it's a bad blemish on American legacy. And thank God it didn't go further. But it does show you it could happen here too. And that last thing I told you, I was going to show you just a quick thing. The lynching of Leo Frank in Marietta, Georgia, 1862, 1913. That's like 50 years later. The hanging of Leo Frank. This picture showed up on the front page of the New York Times the following day. Leo Frank was the president of the B'nai B'rith in Georgia, and he was falsely accused of murdering and raping a 13-year-old girl. The trial was a travesty. The daily reporting of the trial reflected that it was a travesty, that the most obviously dishonest witnesses were testifying. The people in the courtroom were threatening to hurt anybody in the jury who would find Frank not guilty. There were masses outside the courtroom, threw bricks through the windows, so everybody in the courtroom could hear the masses outside chanting death to Frank, death to the Jew, hang the Jew. He was sentenced to death. The governor of Georgia, who was a leading contender for his party's nomination to run for president, committed political suicide, and he granted a commutation to Frank. He did not dare pardon Leo Frank, but he commuted the death sentence to life in prison or something. And after that, a group of people from Marietta, Georgia, Ku Klux Klan, broke into the prison where he was being held, and they kidnapped him from jail, and they brought him to that tree where they hanged him. That was the hanging of Leo Frank, and that was actually, let's just get the screen back up. Sorry. Just, okay. Just get that back up. See if that works it better. And okay, that'll definitely do it. So, okay, good. And what happened was, as we close, that is what led to the founding of the Anti-Defamation League. B'nai B'rith had been created in the 1860s as a social group because men's fraternal orders did not allow Jews to join, like the Knights of Columbus, Catholics only, Knights of Pythias, etc., Lions Club, whatever, Friars Club. Jews couldn't join, so they formed their own club. That was B'nai B'rith. After the hanging of a president of a B'nai B'rith lodge, they created the Anti-Defamation League to fight anti-Semitism through the courts and through the laws. At the same time, another group of people did not want to do it with the German Jews, so they were East European immigrants, and they formed the American Jewish Congress under Stephen Wise. And then there was a third group, the American Jewish Committee. And that was the era, the first decade of the 1900s, 20th century, when those three Jewish defense groups formed, Anti-Defamation League, American Jewish Congress, and American Jewish Committee. And then they took on the 20th century and the rise of Adolf Hitler, which itself is another story for another time. So during this week of the 9 days, which this year has seen Macron announce that France is going to recognize an Arab country in Israel in another month or so or two. And then Starmer threatened Israel that if she does not do X, Y, and Z, that Starmer also is going to recognize an Arab country in Israel, in Judea and Samaria. It's a sad, tough time. It doesn't really matter. You've got to displace Israel from that land, and no one's going to do it. They could all, right now, there are 143 countries on Earth out of around 190. There's around 190 countries on Earth, and 143 recognize an Arab country in Judea Samaria that they call Palestine. There's no such thing. So it won't be like the first ones. Ireland already does. Spain does. A whole bunch of countries already do. It's just these will be two countries that were kind of expected not to be among the early ones to do it. So they're going to do it, but they'll have to uproot 1 million Jews who live there, and that'll be impossible. And there's never going to be, there might have been, if it were before October 7th, there were just enough leftists in Israel who would have gone for a so-called two-state solution. But after October 7th, even the Israeli leftists are against it because they know they'll be killed. The October 7th, most of the people who were massacred, of the 1,200, were leftists. I'm not happy about it. As a right-winger, I don't say that with any pleasure. It's outrageous. I hate it. I hate that any Jews were hurt. But it was educational to the leftists that it was leftist kibbutzim and that leftist all-night dance party on Simchat Torah where most of the massacring took place. And the lesson was learned that all the leftists who want to see an Arab country there understand if there ever would be an Arab country there, Hamas will end up ruling it and no one will be safe. So it's never going to happen. But still, it adds to pressure during the 9 days. And we Jews don't need more pressure. I wanted to share with you, this is a history of what we Jews have been through over the centuries. And we're still strong. And we have not been broken. And we don't walk away. We don't wake up in the morning with a sense of, you won't break me today. We look forward to every day. And we're unbeatable. We learn Torah, teach our children Torah, build communities, and build Israel. So thank you very much for being